The first body was found before dawn. It lay beneath the frostbitten grass, just beyond the timber palisade, where the settlement met the forest and law met wilderness. The girl was no more than 16. Her hands were folded neatly across her chest, as if arranged for burial. No visible wounds, no sign of struggle. Only a thin black ribbon tied around her wrist. By sunrise, the bell of the meeting house was tolling, not for prayer, but for warning. In the colony of Williamsburg in the year 1759, death was not unfamiliar. Disease, childbirth, winter starvation, these were common adversaries. But this was different. This was deliberate. And before the week ended, 3 more bodies would be discovered, each laid out with the same chilling precision. This is the story of the Thornton family, and the silence that protected them. Colonial Virginia, a world of order and fear. To understand what happened, we must step into mid-18th century Virginia, a society built on rigid hierarchy and quiet obedience. In 1759, Virginia was Britain's largest and wealthiest colony. Tobacco plantations stretched across tidewater rivers. Enslaved labor powered the economy. Anglican churches governed morality, and local power rested in the hands of elite families who controlled land, courts, and commerce. The colony operated under English common law, enforced by county courts dominated by wealthy planters. Justice, in theory, was impartial. In practice, it flowed downward. At the center of this social web stood families like the Thorntons. Landowners, magistrates, donors to the parish church, patrons of the College of William and Mary. Their name appeared in court records, land grants, and vestry books. They were the kind of family whose reputation preceded them and shielded them. Outwardly, the Thorntons embodied colonial virtue. Privately, something was wrong. Discovery: the first victim was identified as Anne Weller, daughter of a cooper. She had been missing for 2 days. Her disappearance had drawn little attention at first. Young women often traveled between farms for work or kinship visits. But when her body appeared at the edge of the woods, whispers spread quickly. The black ribbon tied at her wrist was not a known religious symbol, nor was it a mark of local mourning. Within days, 2 more young women vanished. Their bodies were found in nearly identical condition. No bruising, no defensive wounds, no visible trauma. Just that same ribbon. Rumors ignited the town. Some spoke of witchcraft, though Virginia, unlike Massachusetts, had never embraced witch hysteria with the same fervor. Others blamed native raiders, though no settlements nearby had reported unrest. This was during the closing years of the French and Indian War. And tensions across frontier territories were high, but Williamsburg was not the frontier. The killings felt deliberate, intimate, organized, and they occurred frighteningly close to Thornton land. Enter Jonathan Hale. Our understanding of these events comes primarily from the journals of one man, Jonathan Hale. Hale was a clerk recently appointed to assist the York County Court. He's 28 years old, Harvard-educated, the son of a Massachusetts minister who had come south seeking stability after years of northern conflict. He believed deeply in English law, in Enlightenment reason, ideas that were slowly reshaping colonial thought. Unlike many in Virginia's planter aristocracy, Hale was not born into wealth. He observed the colony with a kind of detached curiosity. When the third body was discovered, Hale was assigned to assist in documentation. He was meticulous. He noted the absence of soil beneath the victim's fingernails, the precise folding of hands, the fact that each body appeared recently washed. He wrote privately that the killer possessed either a servant's skill or a gentleman's leisure. That observation would trouble him for the rest of his life. The Thornton estate. The Thornton plantation stood along the James River, several miles from town, a stately Georgian manor with symmetrical windows and a brick facade imported from England. Visitors described it as orderly to the point of sterility. The patriarch, Edmund Thornton, was a respected magistrate and vestryman in the Anglican Church. He had presided over debt disputes, land conflicts, and criminal hearings. He was known for strict adherence to order. His wife Margaret rarely appeared in public. Their son, Samuel Thornton, 23 years old, in 1759, had recently returned from studies in London. He was educated, articulate, and said to possess a volatile temper masked by polished manners. who first assisted authorities in the investigation. He volunteered plantation riders to search the woods. He offered the use of Thornton land for patrol camps. He spoke passionately at the meeting house about protecting colonial daughters from unseen corruption. Jonathan Hale recorded something curious in his journal after that meeting. Mr. Thornton speaks of corruption as though he has studied it closely. The pattern by late autumn, 5 young women had been found, all from lower or middling families, all employed in domestic or agricultural labor, none from elite households. Hola began to suspect the killer possessed access to private space, somewhere bodies could be cleaned and prepared. He also noticed something else. Each disappearance occurred on a Thursday evening. On Thursdays, Edmund Thornton held private gatherings at his estate, dinners attended by magistrates, merchants, and occasionally Anglican clergy. Servants circulated freely. Outsiders came and went. Hal could not accuse a family of such standing without evidence. To do so would risk professional ruin. Yet he continued to write. He interviewed stable boys. He asked about carriage movements, inquired delicately whether any servants had been dismissed abruptly. 2 weeks later, one Thornton servant vanished. No record of his departure exists in county ledgers. Colonial silence. To understand the weight of Hale's dilemma, one must grasp the culture of colonial authority. In 1750s Virginia, elite families were intertwined through marriage, trade, and shared political ambition. Accusing one threatened all. The system protected itself. Even the church was not immune. The Anglican establishment in Virginia functioned both as religious and civic authority. Vestrymen like Edmund Thornton oversaw poor relief, moral discipline, and parish finances. Challenging such a figure meant challenging the very structure of local governance. Hal found resistance at every turn. God! Witnesses retracted statements. Servants claimed ignorance. Rumors dissolved into polite dismissal. One senior magistrate advised Hale quietly. Young men do well to distinguish between justice and stability. It was a warning. 6th body, the 6th victim, broke the pattern. She was discovered not at the forest's edge, but near a shallow stream on land bordering Thornton property. Unlike the others, her ribbon was tied not at the wrist, but around her throat. Hale recorded bruising inconsistent with drowning, and this time, soil beneath her fingernails. She had fought. The shift suggested escalation or desperation. When Hale requested permission to search the Thornton estate, the motion was denied by the court on grounds of insufficient cause. Within days, Hale received an unsigned letter instructing him to cease his inquiries. It ended with a single line, "Order must be preserved." The protagonist and the shadow Jonathan Hale stood at a crossroads between reason and fear. He had come to Virginia believing in the fairness of English law. Now he saw its fragility. Opposing him was not merely a man, but a network embodied most visibly in Samuel Thornton. Charming, composed, always present at moments of discovery, always eager to guide suspicion elsewhere. Was Samuel the architect, a participant, or merely a convenient air shielding something older and darker within his family's walls? Would later write, "There are houses built upon foundations so stained that to expose them would collapse the town itself." He understood the cost of truth and the cost of silence. The killing stopped abruptly in early 1760. No arrests were made. No official culprit was recorded. The ribbons ceased appearing. Within a year, Samuel Thornton married into another prominent Virginia family. Edmund Thornton retained his judicial seat. The estate prospered. And Jonathan Hale quietly resigned from his post. He returned north, but he took his journals with him. Decades later, fragments of those writings would surface in private collections. Raising questions that colonial courts never answered, were the Thornton deaths acts of ritual, power, control, something more personal? Why did the pattern change before it ended? And what truly lay behind the polished brick facade along the James River? History remembers families like the Thorntons as pillars of stability. But stability is often built upon what remains unspoken. You're watching Liturgy of Darkness, where we uncover the hidden sins buried beneath history's sacred walls. If stories like this unsettle you, if you believe the past is more complicated than the monuments suggest, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who questions official history, and leave your thoughts below. Do you believe justice was quietly sacrificed to protect colonial power? Or is there another explanation buried deeper in the record? In Part 2, we will examine Jonathan Hale's private correspondence, the financial ledgers of the Thornton estate, and a discovery made in 1783 that threatens to rewrite everything we think we know about this case. Because sometimes, the most terrifying chapters of history were never meant to be read. And sometimes, they're still waiting to be uncovered. Beneath brick and scripture, when Jonathan Hale left Virginia in the spring of 1760, he did not leave in disgrace. Officially, he resigned due to family obligations in Massachusetts. The court record notes, nothing unusual. His name simply disappears from York County payroll ledgers, replaced by another clerk whose handwriting lacked Hale's meticulous precision. But Hale did not leave empty-handed. Carried with him copies discreet, incomplete, but enough. And over the next 23 years, as colonial unrest swelled into revolution, he continued to write. Virginia in the Shadow of Empire. To understand what Hale suspected, we must step deeper into the world he was attempting to confront. By the 1760s, Virginia was both prosperous and fragile. Tobacco exports enriched elite planters, but the economy was dangerously dependent on British credit. Many powerful families lived beyond their means, mortgaging future harvests to London merchants. Debt quietly tethered the colony to imperial interests. Plantation architecture reflected this tension. Grand Georgian manors, symmetrical facades, sash windows, central halls, projected stability. Beneath them, however, were networks of service corridors, storage vaults, and sometimes concealed chambers used for storing valuables, ledgers, or contraband goods that bypassed customs duties. The Thornton estate fit this pattern precisely. Built in 1738, the manor featured a central passage flanked by formal rooms, with a detached kitchen connected by a covered walkway, common practice to reduce fire risk. Behind the structure stood tobacco warehouses and slave quarters arranged in ordered rows. Order. That word recurs constantly in Hale's journals. Virginia's Anglican Church reinforced it. Vestrymen like Edmund Thornton managed parish funds, poor relief, and moral discipline. They fined citizens for absence from services. They adjudicated disputes. Church and state were not separate, they were entwined. Publicly defying a vestryman meant risking social exile. Hale understood that what he was investigating was not merely murder. It was structure. The ledgers in 1768, 8 years after leaving Virginia, Hale received a parcel in Boston. There was no return address. Inside were copied fragments of Thornton estate ledgers, financial records from 1758 and 1759. The entries were ordinary at first glance. Tobacco shipments, payments to overseers, imported furniture from Bristol, wine from Madeira. Hale noticed irregularities. Large sums marked simply as maintenance adjustments, payments to unnamed laborers, and repeated purchases of black silk ribbon, far exceeding what would be needed for household attire. The ribbon purchases stopped abruptly in February 1760, so did the killings. Hale began comparing dates. The ribbon shipments aligned closely with the Thursday gatherings held at the Thornton estate, the so-called dinners, he wrote privately, where coin flows without designation. Conscience often follows. Architecture as concealment. One of the most troubling entries in Hale's later journal refers to a structural modification at the Thornton Manor. In 1757, building materials were purchased in unusual quantity: brick, lime, mortar, timber beams. The record describes it as foundation reinforcement, but Hale had visited the estate many times during his clerkship. He remembered no visible expansion. So what had been reinforced? In colonial architecture, basements were common, but rarely extensive. Tidewater homes often included root cellars or storage vaults beneath the main structure. These spaces were cool, hidden, and easily sealed. Hale theorized the Thorntons had expanded their undercroft, perhaps creating a concealed chamber accessible only from within the manor. He had no proof, but he had something stranger. The letters among the copied documents were fragments of correspondence between Samuel Thornton and an acquaintance in London, a man identified only as R.F. The letters were written in polished prose, referencing philosophy, morality, and necessary discipline. They cited Enlightenment thinkers like Locke and Montesquieu, yet twisted their principles. One passage read, "Society demands sacrifice of the lesser for preservation of the greater. Stability cannot endure unchecked contagion." The language was clinical, detached. The phrase unchecked contagion appeared repeatedly. Hale began to suspect that the victims had been rationalized, perhaps even categorized as threats to order. Lower-class women, laborers, those without powerful kin, expendable. Internal strain. By 1770, Hale's writings reveal a man at war with himself. The colonies were shifting. The Stamp Act crisis had stirred resentment. The Townshend duties intensified anger toward Britain. Intellectual circles in Boston debated liberty and rights. Hale had once believed in British law as a civilizing force. Now he saw how easily law shielded power. He questioned whether exposing the Thorntons, even years later, would serve justice or destabilize a fragile society already fracturing under imperial strain. His father, still a minister, urged restraint. Truth must uplift, not unravel, he wrote to Jonathan. But Hale had seen unraveling already. He could not forget the sixth body, the bruising, the soil beneath her nails. The fight. The Thornton ascendancy. While Hale wrestled with conscience in Massachusetts, the Thornton family's influence expanded. Samuel Thornton secured a seat in the House of Burgesses in 1769. He aligned himself publicly with moderate reformers, advocating colonial rights while maintaining loyalty to British order. It was a careful position. Edmund Thornton, aging but still formidable, continued overseeing parish affairs. Church records showed generous donations to rebuild a chapel damaged by storm. Charity toward widows, funding for orphan apprenticeships, reputation fortified by benevolence. Yet one curious incident appears in vestry minutes from 1771. A motion to seal an unused storage chamber beneath the parish hall, due to structural instability. The motion passed quickly. No further mention exists. Hale underlined this entry in his copy. Storage chamber, structural instability. He began to suspect a pattern of concealed spaces, not only at the Thornton estate, but connected to parish property. Religion and power. Anglican theology in colonial Virginia emphasized hierarchy. God above king, king above subjects, fathers above households, masters above servants. Disobedience threatened divine order. The idea that certain individuals could be deemed morally defective, spiritually diseased, was not foreign to the era. Public punishments, whipping posts, and stocks reinforced communal discipline. What if the Thornton gatherings were not mere dinners? What if they were tribunals? Private judgments passed upon those deemed socially or morally unfit. The black ribbon, could it symbolize condemnation? Hal found no liturgical reference to black silk in Anglican rites. But he did discover something unsettling in an obscure London pamphlet discussing moral purification societies' clandestine groups, claiming authority to discipline vice outside formal courts. One marginal note in Samuel's London letter referenced a circle of reformers. Hale's handwriting grows jagged in this section of his journal. Reform without accountability is tyranny disguised as virtue. The war and the silence. The outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775 shifted priorities dramatically. Virginia joined the rebellion. Militia mobilized. Tobacco exports collapsed temporarily. British ships threatened coastal plantations. Chaos consumed records. Hale feared the trail would vanish entirely. Yet war also weakened entrenched authority. Vestry structures dissolved temporarily. Some estates were looted or abandoned. Loyalists fled. Samuel Thornton, however, navigated the turmoil skillfully. He aligned with patriot leaders, contributing funds to militia efforts. His public image transformed into that of a defender of liberty. Liberty. Hale could not reconcile the word with the images etched in his memory. A return to Virginia in 1783, after the Treaty of Paris formally ended the war, Hale made a decision. He returned to Virginia, now 42 years old, older and wearier. He traveled under the pretense of surveying post-war property claims. He carried letters of introduction from northern merchants. The Thornton estate still stood, weathered but intact. Edmund Thornton had died in 1779. Samuel now controlled the property entirely. Hale observed changes immediately. A detached kitchen had been rebuilt. Slave quarters expanded, and the manor's foundation appeared altered, fresh mortar lining the lower brick courses. He requested a tour, citing interest in architectural resilience after wartime neglect. Samuel obliged, polite, controlled. aging into his father's composure. The basement was narrow, low-ceilinged. Storage casks lined the walls. Nothing overtly unusual. Until Hale noticed a section of brickwork along the eastern wall, newer than the rest. Samuel explained it as reinforcement after subsidence. Hale ran his fingers across the mortar. It was colder, denser, as if concealing something beyond. The discovery 3 nights later, under cover of darkness, Hale returned. He had secured quiet assistance from a freed laborer who once worked on the estate and remembered the 1757 renovations. The man spoke of digging deeper than necessary, constructing a chamber without windows. They entered through a side access hatch used for coal storage. Working silently, they chipped at the newer brick section. The mortar gave way slowly. Behind it was not solid earth, it was hollow, a narrow cavity no more than 6 feet deep. Inside lay fragments, not complete skeletons, fragments, ribbons, decayed but unmistakably black, and a ledger. Bound in leather, wrapped in oilcloth. Hale's hands trembled as he opened it. The entries were dated 1758 to 1760, names of young women, annotations beside each, corrected, purified, resolved. At the bottom of several pages, a signature, ST, and beneath that, initials matching to other prominent magistrates. This was not a lone killer. It was a circle, private tribunal operating beneath the veneer of law. Understood instantly what this meant. The Thornton gatherings had been structured rituals of judgment, self-appointed arbiters deciding who threatened social order. The black ribbon-marked sentence carried out. The 6th victim had fought because she had discovered what was happening, and perhaps because the circle had begun to fracture. Hale replaced the fragments carefully. He copied what he could by candlelight. He knew exposing this would detonate reputations across Virginia. Men now celebrated as founders of a new republic. The revolution had promised liberty, but beneath its foundations lay something older, something darker. As dawn approached, Hale closed the ledger and whispered the words he would later write in his final entry. Independence does not cleanse what was buried. It only changes who guards the grave. The discovery changed everything, because it was no longer a question of suspicion. It was proof, and proof, in a nation newly born, could be more dangerous than silence. The weight of knowing Jonathan Hale did not sleep the night after he found the ledger. The pages had been copied by trembling candlelight, each name transcribed with deliberate care. He concealed the folded sheets inside the lining of his travel case, stitched beneath coarse linen. The original ledger he had returned to its hidden chamber behind the Thornton wall. Nothing outwardly had changed, and yet everything had, because knowledge once acquired alters the air around a man. The next morning Hale felt it immediately. Eyes lingered a second too long in the market square. Conversations lowered when he passed. A stable hand who had previously greeted him with warmth avoided his gaze entirely. Or perhaps it was imagination. Hale had learned long ago that paranoia can bloom quickly in an atmosphere of secrecy. Still, he could not ignore a simple truth. He had disturbed something that had been sealed for 23 years. Those who sealed it might still be watching. Williamsburg after the war, the Virginia of 1783, was not the Virginia Hale had left. The Revolution had reshaped allegiances but not erased hierarchies. Former loyalists had quietly reintegrated. Patriot leaders now occupied the seats once held by imperial appointees. Plantation wealth endured. Enslaved labor remained the backbone of the economy. Publicly, Virginia celebrated independence. Privately, power had simply shifted hands. Samuel Thornton stood among the new elite, a man who had navigated rebellion without losing estate or reputation. He now spoke of republican virtue, a vigilance against corruption, moral fortitude in a fragile republic. Hale listened from the back of the assembly hall as Samuel addressed a small gathering of merchants. The voice was calm, measured, convincing. If Hale had not seen the ledger, he might have believed him. That was the danger. The illness 3 days after the discovery, Hale awoke with a bitter metallic taste in his mouth. His limbs felt heavy. His vision swam at the edges. A faint nausea pulsed behind his ribs. He attributed it at first to exhaustion. But by afternoon, the symptoms intensified. He had eaten only bread and tea the previous evening. The innkeeper insisted nothing was spoiled. No other guest reported illness. Hale forced himself to remain upright, reviewing his notes to ensure clarity of mind. Had someone known he returned to the estate that night? Had someone followed him? Poison in the 18th century was rarely theatrical. Arsenic could be administered in small doses, producing symptoms easily mistaken for natural sickness. Hale recorded his pulse, measured the intervals between waves of dizziness. He left a sealed envelope with his copied notes in the care of a trusted courier, instructing that it be delivered north if he failed to collect it within 5 days. Precaution, not panic. Still, someone might have acted. If someone had acted, they had done so quietly. The watcher on the 4th evening, Hale noticed him. A man in plain brown coat, hat pulled low, standing across from the inn's entrance near a cooper's workshop, not lingering suspiciously, simply present. When Hale stepped into the street, the man turned away, coincidence perhaps. Yet the following morning, the same coat appeared near the apothecary, and again near the courthouse. Hale altered his route deliberately, weaving through narrower alleys, pausing unpredictably. The man adjusted without haste, not pursuit. Observation. There is a difference. Hale did not confront him. Confrontation reveals awareness. Awareness shifts the balance. Instead, Hale returned to his room and reread the copied ledger entries. The initials beneath Samuel's signature troubled him most. 2 other magistrates. Men still living. Men now occupying prominent positions in Virginia's new government. Exposing this circle would not merely tarnish a family, would implicate the very architects of post-war order. Hull began to understand that the ledger was not just evidence of murder, it was leverage, and leverage invites retaliation. A letter in code on the 5th day his illness subsided. Not completely, but enough to restore clarity. That afternoon, a folded sheet appeared beneath his door. No seal, no signature. Inside, a single line written in a tight, deliberate hand. Brick remembers what flesh forgets. Below it, a small mark, 3 interlocking circles. Hale's breath slowed. The same symbol appeared faintly on the inside cover of the ledger. He had assumed it decorative. Now he recognized it as emblem, a sign of membership. The circle was not dissolved. It endured. The coded phrase was both warning and acknowledgement. They knew he had been inside the wall. They knew he had seen. The question was not whether they would act. The question was when. Internal fracture. Hale wrestled with calculation. If he left immediately, he could preserve the copied evidence, could publish anonymously in northern pamphlets, igniting scandal at a time when the Republic struggled to define itself. But accusation without physical proof might be dismissed as political slander. If he stayed, he risked interception of documents of life. He found himself thinking of Anne Weller, the first girl, her folded hands. The clinical word written beside her name, corrected. He had once believed that justice required patience. Now he wondered whether patience was merely another word for fear. Each hour he delayed felt like complicity, yet reckless action would bury the truth forever. It was a calculus no law book prepared him to solve. The parish hall, compelled by the coded message, Hale revisited parish records. The vestry minutes from 1771 mentioned sealing a storage chamber due to instability. He requested access under the guise of architectural interest. The hall smelled of aged wood and damp earth. The current vestryman, unaware of Hale's deeper purpose, unlocked a side door leading below. The chamber was small, brick-lined, low ceiling, recently whitewashed. Too recently. The mortar bore marks inconsistent with simple repair. Hale traced the perimeter, counting bricks. One section along the northern wall echoed faintly when tapped. He felt the weight of eyes above. The vestryman waited impatiently at the stair. Hale did not linger long enough to arouse suspicion. But he had seen enough. Another hollow space, connected to the church. The circle's reach extended beyond plantation walls. They had embedded themselves in sacred architecture. If the Thornton estate chamber housed records and remains, what did the parish hall conceal? Or who? The betrayal. That evening, Hale's trusted courier failed to appear. The envelope he had left days earlier remained uncollected. When Hale inquired discreetly, he learned the courier had departed suddenly for Richmond, summoned by urgent business. Summoned by whom? Hale understood then that his precaution had been intercepted. Someone had intercepted his communication. The watcher in the brown coat had not been mere surveillance. It had been coordination. Hale returned to his room and removed the stitched lining from his travel case. He counted the copied pages, still intact. But now the circle knew he possessed them. The innkeeper knocked shortly after sunset. A polite request. Mr. Thornton would appreciate your company for supper tomorrow evening. An invitation, or a summons. Hale held the paper invitation in silence. Refusal would confirm suspicion. Acceptance would place him inside the lion's den. He accepted. Supper at Thornton Manor. The estate appeared unchanged under moonlight. Brick facade pale against the river's dark current. Inside, candlelight flickered across polished wood and imported silver. Samuel Thornton greeted Hale warmly. Too warmly. 2 other men were present, both magistrates whose initials appeared in the ledger. They spoke casually of agricultural recovery after war, of trade routes reopening with the West Indies, of optimism for the Republic's future. Wine was poured generously. Hale sipped cautiously. He observed details. The 3 interlocking circles subtly engraved on a signet ring worn by one magistrate. A matching motif embroidered faintly into the table runner's border, not ostentatious, recognizable only to those who knew. At one point, Samuel leaned forward, voice soft. You returned to Virginia after many years, Mr. Hale. Curiosity must be a powerful companion. Hale met his gaze evenly. As powerful as conscience, I find. A flicker crossed Samuel's expression, not anger. Not fear. Calculation. The conversation drifted to philosophy, to Locke's theories of governance, to the necessity of order in a republic susceptible to chaos. One magistrate remarked quietly, some corrections are unpleasant, but essential. The word hung between them. Correction, Hale. Realized the supper was not threat. It was demonstration. They wanted him to understand that they were unified, unashamed, unworried, because they believed him isolated. And perhaps they were right. The final omen, as Hal prepared to depart, Samuel handed him a small parcel, token of hospitality. Inside was a length of black silk ribbon, perfectly folded. No words accompanied it. The message required none. They knew. They knew he knew. And they were reminding him that they had acted before and could again. Hale returned to the inn in silence. He placed the ribbon beside his copied ledger pages. 2 objects representing past and present. He sensed movement outside his window, shadow lingering near the stable. The watcher. This was no longer subtle containment. It was pressure. Tomorrow, Hale would attempt one final act. He would access the sealed chamber beneath the parish hall fully this time, if it contained what he suspected. The circle's reach would extend beyond private tribunal into institutional sanctification. If he uncovered proof linking church and circle, exposure would no longer be personal accusation. It would be systemic indictment. But gaining entry would require distraction. Distraction would require risk. As midnight deepened, Hale extinguished his candle and lay awake in darkness. He listened to footsteps outside, measured, patient. He understood now that leaving quietly was no longer possible. The circle had acknowledged him. Acknowledgement precedes confrontation. At dawn, he would descend beneath sacred brick, and whatever waited below would decide whether truth could survive in a nation newly born, or whether some sins were destined to remain entombed forever. The steps outside his window stopped. Silence followed, and then a single knock at his door. Silence before judgment. The knock at the door did not come again. It lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. Jonathan Hale sat upright in the darkness, pulse steady but sharpened. He did not reach for the handle immediately. He did not call out. The silence after the knock felt deliberate. Not a mistake, not drunken wandering, but a signal. A reminder that he was no longer moving unseen. Minutes passed, no further sound. When Hale finally rose and opened the door, the hallway stood empty. Only the faint draft from the stairwell drifted upward. On the floor lay a folded scrap of paper. No seal, no signature. It's just 3 interlocking circles drawn in charcoal. Beneath them, a single word. Witness. The interval, this is the moment where history seems to inhale. The violence pauses, the pursuit quiets. And beneath the stillness, every character stands exposed, not in action, but in motive. The ledger had revealed what the Thorntons and their circle had done. But motive defines power. And now the story turned inward. Jonathan Hale, the reluctant prosecutor, Jonathan Hale, was not a revolutionary by nature. Born in 1741 to a modest congregational minister in Massachusetts, he was raised in a household where scripture and law were intertwined but carefully distinguished. His father believed justice must serve mercy. Hale believed justice must serve truth. Harvard-educated, disciplined, intellectually rigorous, but not fearless. His weakness had always been caution. In 1759, he had suspected the Thornton family, yet lacked courage to confront them openly. He recorded, he observed, but he did not accuse. He told himself it was prudence, that without evidence, accusation would be futile. When the killings ceased, he accepted silence as resolution and carried the guilt north with him. For 23 years, that guilt matured. It resurfaced during the Revolution, when debates over liberty forced him to reconsider what justice meant. He watched as colonists denounced tyranny while protecting their own hierarchies. The contradiction unsettled him. Strength was persistence. He did not forget. He archived, cross-referenced, revisited. Where others moved on, Hale returned. But persistence without boldness becomes obsession. And obsession can distort judgment. Now in 1783, Hale stood not merely as investigator, but as potential executioner of reputations. If he exposed the circle, he would fracture Virginia's fragile stability. If he remained silent, he would affirm that power can murder without consequence. His moral conflict was not between good and evil. It was between truth and survival. Samuel Thornton, the architect of order, Samuel Thornton, was not a monster in his own mind. He was an idealist. Educated in London during a time when Enlightenment philosophy flourished, he absorbed ideas about governance, structure, and societal refinement. He believed chaos was civilization's greatest enemy. The French and Indian War had shown him frontier brutality. Poverty in Williamsburg's outer quarters revealed to him what he called moral decay. He saw disorder everywhere, unregulated behavior, vice, vulnerability. His father, Edmund, taught him that elites bore responsibility for maintaining order. That law must sometimes operate beyond public scrutiny. Samuel internalized that lesson. To him, the circle was not a conspiracy. It was a corrective mechanism. The young women recorded in the ledger were not innocent in his eyes. They were labeled, though the reasons were obscured by coded annotations. Disruptive, infectious, compromised. Compromised? How? Hale's copied notes suggested whispers of alleged misconduct, accusations of theft, rumored immorality, associations with transient soldiers. Nothing proven in court, nothing formally tried. But to Samuel, formal courts were slow, bound by procedure. The circle acted decisively. They saw themselves as guardians. That was their justification. Samuel believed the Republic could not survive if moral contagion spread unchecked. Public scandal would weaken trust. Quiet removal preserved harmony. His belief system was terrifying not because it was irrational, but because it was internally consistent. He believed he was protecting the colony, now the state. He did not relish violence. He rationalized it. That distinction allowed him to sleep. Edmund Thornton, the absent foundation, though dead by 1783, Edmund Thornton's influence lingered like mortar-binding brick. He had built the circle. Court records from the 1750s show his frustration with petty crime and social decay. In vestry meetings, he advocated harsher discipline. Private letters reveal fear that British oversight weakened local autonomy. He believed elites must govern themselves free from distant interference, so he created a tribunal beyond the tribunal. Edmund's motivation was paternalistic control. Samuel inherited not only land, but philosophy. The circle's 3 interlocking rings likely symbolized something simple: law, church, and family, united, unquestioned. The supporting figures, loyalty, and fear. The 2 magistrates whose initials appeared in the ledger now occupied respected posts in Virginia's post-war governance. They were not zealots like Edmund, nor visionaries like Samuel. They were men who chose alignment over resistance. In 1759, when the first deaths occurred, they likely faced a decision: object and risk isolation. Or participate and gain protection. Participation binds men more tightly than silence. Complicity ensures loyalty. Fear also played its role. Once involved, they could not withdraw. And over time, the narrative likely shifted in their minds. They convinced themselves it had been necessary, that the victims were exceptions, that the circle prevented greater instability. Fear of exposure replaced fear of wrongdoing. Now, in 1783, they were invested. Reputation, land, influence, exposure would destroy not only Samuel, but them, perhaps the new state itself. The emotional undercurrents. Hale realized something unsettling as he sat in the dim light of his rented room, the ribbon before him. The circle had not threatened him directly. It invited him to supper, shown him unity. Left the ribbon not as intimidation, but as acknowledgement. They saw him as a potential witness, not yet an enemy. Samuel's question at supper echoed, "Curiosity must be a powerful companion." Was this an attempt at recruitment or containment? Hull felt the weight of temptation. What if he joined them? What if he accepted that the world required hidden guardians to protect himself? Influence reform from within. That thought disgusted him, but it lingered. Moral ambiguity is most dangerous when it offers safety. The parish secret. Hale's intuition about the parish hall deepened overnight. Why seal a chamber beneath sacred ground unless it concealed something incompatible with sanctity? Church authority in colonial Virginia had been administrative as much as spiritual. Vestrymen managed taxes, poor relief, and local discipline. The church was civic infrastructure. If the circle met beneath the parish hall, their actions would carry theological endorsement even if unofficial. Divine sanction. That possibility disturbed Hale more than the murders. It meant the killings were ritualized, not chaotic, systematic. The dramatic revelation. The next morning, Hale acted not in haste, but in deliberate stillness. He requested an audience with Samuel Thornton. Not privately, but at the courthouse, in daylight, in public space. Samuel agreed. The room was nearly empty when they met. Sunlight filtered through tall sash windows, illuminating dust suspended in air. Holy placed the folded scrap bearing the 3 circles on the table. Samuel did not flinch. "You are aware," Holy began calmly, "that architecture preserves memory? Brick conceals, but does not erase." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You returned to Virginia seeking something," he replied. "Have you found it?" Hale removed a single-copied ledger page. "Not all. Just one. Ann Weller's name. The annotation." Corrected. Samuel studied the page. Silence filled the room. The tension resembled a courtroom pause before a verdict measured, heavy, inevitable. "You misunderstand context," Samuel said softly. "There are forces you cannot comprehend from ink alone." "Then help me comprehend," Hale replied. Another silence. Samuel leaned forward. "You think exposure will cleanse this place?" "It will ignite it. The Republic is unsteady. Scandal will fracture alliances. Enemies abroad watch for weakness." "You speak as though murder preserves liberty," Hal answered. Samuel's voice sharpened, not loudly, but with conviction. "Liberty without order collapses into ruin." There it was. The core, not madness, belief. Samuel believed history required hidden correction. Hale believed history required illumination. So philosophies colliding in controlled calm. Samuel did not deny the ledger. He reframed it. That was the revelation. The circle would not hide if confronted. They would justify, publicly. And justification could persuade. Hale realized then that exposure would not guarantee condemnation. It might spark division. Some would defend the circle as necessary guardians during turbulent years. The power dynamic shifted. Hale was no longer simply hunter. He was catalyst. Catalysts are unpredictable. The decision, Hale returned to his quarters with clarity. He could not rely solely on the ledger fragments. He needed the parish chamber opened, publicly, with witnesses. He needed tangible proof, linking church, court, and circle. And he needed to act before the circle consolidated further control. He packed his case, removed the stitched lining once more, divided the copied pages into separate bundles. One to remain hidden, one to be sent north, one to carry with him. He drafted a formal petition requesting structural inspection of the parish hall on grounds of safety. citing instability concerns recorded in 1771. A legal pretext, difficult to deny. As dusk approached, Hale stood before the parish building, staring at its modest brick facade. It appeared harmless, sanctified, ordinary. He knew what might lie beneath. He also knew that once he forced the chamber open, there would be no retreat, no more cautious observation, no more interval, only consequence. Jonathan Hale, once the careful clerk who hesitated in 1759, made a decision he had postponed for decades. He would open the chamber, not quietly, not secretly, but in the presence of witnesses. Let the brick remember, and let the Republic decide what it wished to bury. The chamber opens the morning the parish hall was opened. Williamsburg did not yet know it was standing on the edge of rupture. The sky was pale and windless. Market stalls assembled as usual. Carriages rolled across packed dirt roads. Enslaved laborers carried baskets toward kitchens and warehouses. Merchants argued over tariffs still unsettled after independence. The Republic felt fragile but functional. And beneath the parish hall, sealed brick waited. Jonathan Hale did not arrive alone. He had secured what he needed, not allies, but witnesses. 2 lesser magistrates, with no known connection to the Thornton circle. A carpenter, familiar with structural inspection. And, most importantly, the parish vestryman himself, who had reluctantly agreed under pressure of Hale's formal petition citing public safety concerns. The language had been deliberate, not accusation, inspection, neutral ground. Samuel Thornton was present as well. He arrived unannounced but unsurprised, stepping down from his carriage with measured calm. His presence carried weight, a reminder that nothing significant occurred in Williamsburg without elite awareness. The townspeople gathered gradually, drawn by curiosity rather than alarm. Parish inspections were not spectacle, but the presence of prominent figures suggested something unusual. Hal felt the shift immediately. Public tension has a distinct atmosphere heavier than private fear, more volatile than rumor. It hums dissent. The door to the lower chamber opened with resistance, as if reluctant to disturb the dust of years. The air below was cool, stale. Lanterns were lit. Shadows stretched along brick walls. The vestryman cleared his throat. This chamber was sealed due to instability after the war. There is likely nothing of consequence. Hale nodded calmly. We will determine that together. The carpenter tapped methodically along the northern wall, the section Hale had identified. The echo returned, hollow and distinct. A murmur rippled through the onlookers gathered at the stair. Samuel watched without expression. Remove it, Hale instructed. The first brick came loose easily. The second required more effort. With each dislodged layer, the sound of scraping mortar echoed upward into the hall above, where more townspeople now gathered. Curiosity transforms quickly into anxiety. When the opening widened enough for lantern light to pass through, the carpenter paused. There's space beyond. Hale stepped forward. Continue. The revelation, the final brick fell inward. Lantern light spilled into a narrow cavity, larger than expected. Not merely a void, but a constructed alcove reinforced with timber supports. Inside lay a wooden chest, dust-covered, sealed. The sight altered the air. This was no accidental structural flaw. This was intention. Hale felt his pulse quicken but forced composure. He turned toward the vestryman. Shall we open it? The man hesitated, glancing instinctively toward Samuel. Yes. There it was, loyalty and fear colliding in real time. Samuel spoke smoothly. If there is nothing improper, we all benefit from transparency. His voice carried upward to the crowd. Transparency. A word newly fashionable in Republican rhetoric. The chest was lifted carefully into the center of the chamber. The lid resisted at first, then yielded with a groan of old wood. Inside lay documents bound, bundled, preserved. And beneath them, links of black silk ribbon. Collective breath left the room. Some recognized it. Others sensed significance without knowing why. Hale reached into the chest and withdrew a ledger. Not identical to the one hidden in Thornton's estate, but similar. This one bore a different title, etched faintly on the inside cover. Parish Discipline Register. He opened to the first page. Names, dates, annotations. But unlike the plantation ledger, these entries extended beyond 1760. They continued through 1774. The killings had not stopped. They had shifted location, and perhaps method. The crowd reacts, whispers spread rapidly up the stairwell. Discipline. What does it mean? Why are there names? A woman in the doorway pushed forward. My sister disappeared in 72. The murmuring intensified. Samuel stepped forward, voice calm but firmer now. These records reflect moral interventions conducted discreetly during turbulent years. They prevented scandal and preserved community stability. Hale lifted his eyes. Moral intervention? Samuel met his gaze. You know as well as I that war breeds disorder, theft, vice, betrayal. Some matters cannot be aired publicly without destroying trust. The argument was subtle, not denial. Justification. Hale turned another page. Next to several names, a new annotation appeared. Relocated, no further detail. But below one entry from 1773, written in a hurried hand. Complication, resistance. Hale looked up slowly. These interventions, he said evenly, were conducted by whom? Silence. One of the lesser magistrates shifted uneasily. The carpenter stepped back from the chest. The crowd pressed closer. As Samuel answered, by men entrusted with maintaining order when formal institutions were paralyzed by war? Men like you? Hale asked. Samuel did not respond immediately. He did not need to. Ripple effects news spreads in colonial towns faster than paper. By afternoon, Williamsburg buzzed with conflicting accounts. Some claimed bodies had been discovered. Others insisted it was mere financial impropriety. At taverns, debates erupted. Perhaps they did what courts could not, or perhaps they murdered in God's name. Planters worried about instability. Merchants feared trade disruption. Clergy felt their authority tremble beneath them. If the parish had been used as cover for clandestine judgments, what did that imply about the sanctity of the church itself? Anglican authority, already weakened by revolution and disestablishment movements, now faced internal fracture. This was no longer about one family. It was about institutional legitimacy. Hale understood the magnitude instantly. Exposed too much too quickly, and panic could destabilize fragile post-tour recovery. Exposed to little, and the circle would reframe the narrative before sunset. He stood at the center of a widening storm. Emotional consequences as dusk approached. Hale found himself alone briefly in the parish chamber. He stared at the ledger pages spread across the table. Names of women. A few men. Annotations clinical and detached. No recorded hearings. No recorded defenses. Just outcomes. He felt a surge of anger, not theatrical, but cold and focused. For years he had doubted himself. Wondered whether his suspicions had exaggerated isolated crimes. Now the evidence extended beyond 1759. Beyond the Thorntons, the circle had institutionalized secrecy, yet doubt remained. What if Samuel believed genuinely that he had prevented chaos? What if some of the entries reflected exile rather than death? Relocation rather than execution? Hell had no bodies here, only records. Ambiguity is powerful. It allows defenders to reinterpret horror as necessity. That was the circle's shield. The public assembly that evening, an emergency gathering convened at the courthouse. Magistrates, vestry members, prominent landowners. Samuel Thornton stood at the front, composed as ever. Hal presented the parish ledger publicly. Gasps punctuated the reading of selected entries. A heated debate followed. One elder magistrate spoke first. These records suggest informal arbitration during extraordinary times. Arbitration without consent is coercion, Hal replied. Another voice rose from the back. My daughter vanished in 1771. You call that arbitration? The room fractured into factions. Some argued that during war, extraordinary measures were necessary. Others insisted that no measure justified disappearance without trial. This was no longer quiet exposure. It was ideological confrontation. Order versus liberty, security versus transparency. Samuel stepped forward once more. If these actions are condemned outright, we risk discrediting men who secured this colony's survival, a calculated appeal to patriotism. The ripple widened. If the circle included war heroes, exposing them could stain the revolutionary narrative itself. The Republic's founding myth trembled at the edges. The partial revelation under pressure, one of the magistrates, his voice shaking, admitted participation. Not in killings, he insisted, but in review. He claimed that some individuals listed had been sent away quietly to prevent scandal. Others, he said, met unfortunate ends during transfer. Transfer to where? He did not answer. But the admission cracked the facade. The circle was real, organized, sanctioned informally by men in power. Hale felt the room shift toward reckoning. Then Samuel delivered his most calculated move. He produced a document of his own, list of names, merchants, clergy, even minor officials, who had petitioned privately for the circle's assistance during the war. Fear of theft, fear of desertion, fear of espionage. Requests for discreet resolution. The list implicated respected figures across Williamsburg. Gasps turned to silence. If the circle fell, so too would many reputations. Complicity was widespread. The revelation shifted power instantly. This was not a rogue tribunal. It was community-enabled secrecy. They felt the weight settle on his shoulders. He had ignited exposure. But exposure now threatened to consume not only perpetrators but petitioners, widows whose sons had sought intervention, merchants who had requested discipline, clergy who had looked away. The addiction factor tightened. Every answer produced more questions. Every layer revealed deeper entanglement. Emotional fallout outside the courthouse, arguments spilled into the street. Families confronted neighbors, accusations flew. The Republic, still fragile, felt the strain. Hale realized with clarity that this story was no longer about punishment. It was about identity. If Virginia admitted that its guardians had conducted secret tribunals, what did that say about the moral foundation of independence? If it denied it, what did that say about justice? He saw fear in faces that morning had only shown curiosity. Fear of instability. Fear of shame. Fear of truth. Samuel approached him privately as the crowd dispersed. "You see now," Samuel said quietly, "that this is larger than you imagined." Hale did not disagree, but it must be confronted. Samuel's expression hardened slightly. "Confrontation may tear apart what we just built, and concealment rots it from within," Hale replied. For the first time, Samuel's composure flickered. "You have no proof of executions?" "Not yet," Hale said. The words hung between them. Not yet, the shocking turning point. As night settled over Williamsburg, a rider arrived breathless from the outskirts of town. He demanded entry to the courthouse. Hale and Samuel were both summoned back inside. The rider spoke urgently. Recently unearthed grave near the riverbank, disturbed by flooding, had exposed skeletal remains. Multiple remains, bound wrists, fragments of black silk preserved in soil, and among the debris, a metal signet ring. 3 interlocking circles engraved upon it. The crowd outside began to realize what this meant. This was no longer a debate over relocation. This was physical evidence, Bodie's proof. The consequences would now move beyond rhetoric. Hale felt the ground shift beneath him, not metaphorically but politically. Exposure had crossed from ledger to bone. Samuel stood very still. For the first time, silence did not protect him. It did. And as lanterns were gathered and men prepared to ride toward the riverbank, one question settled heavily over the town. If the graves held more than names, if they held undeniable proof of execution, who else would be buried when the truth emerged? The writer added one final detail before collapsing from exhaustion. The flooding exposed more than bones. It uncovered a second chest, and no one yet knew what that chest contained. What the river gave back the James River does not forget. It erodes patiently. It shifts soil grain by grain. It carries away silt and returns what men believed was sealed forever. The flood that autumn did not roar. It rose, slowly, quietly, inevitably. And when the banks receded, the earth along the low bend near Thornton land split open just enough to expose what brick and authority had concealed for decades. Lanterns lined the riverbank that night. Magistrates, laborers, clergy, onlookers who had followed in breathless silence from Williamsburg's courthouse. Jonathan Hale stood at the edge of the disturbed ground as shovels cut carefully through wet soil. The first bones were unmistakable. Wrists bound by fragments of decayed black silk, not relocated, not corrected, buried. One skeleton bore a small metal clasp, engraved with initials matching a name from the parish ledger, Anne Weller's younger cousin. Missing since 1772, the crowd did not murmur this time. They watched. And in watching, they crossed a threshold from suspicion into knowledge. The second chest, it took nearly an hour to unearth the second chest the writer had described. Smaller than the one beneath the parish hall, heavier, sealed with iron brackets corroded by moisture. When it was pried open beneath the wavering lantern light, the smell of old paper and river rot rose into the air. Inside lay correspondence. Dozens of letters, not merely internal records, but exchanges with other counties, references to similar disciplinary circles, mentions of transfers conducted along trade routes. One letter from 1763 referenced assistance from allied brethren in another Virginia parish. This was no isolated tribunal. It was a network. Hale felt the realization settle over the gathered men like frost. If the Thornton Circle had counterparts elsewhere, exposure would ripple beyond Williamsburg. The Republic's early scaffolding trembled. Samuel Thornton stood slightly apart from the digging site. His face, illuminated by firelight, revealed neither panic nor defiance, only calculation, and perhaps for the first time, uncertainty. The confrontation did not unfold as a duel of raised voices. It unfolded as a tightening of silence. Hale approached Samuel slowly, holding one of the letters retrieved from the chest. It bore Samuel's signature, and beneath it the three interlocking circles. "Do you deny this?" Hale asked quietly. Samuel did not reach for the document. "No," he said. The admission moved through the crowd like a chill wind. "Admit," Hale continued, "that you participated in a network conducting extrajudicial judgments resulting in death." Samuel's gaze did not waver. "I admit," he replied, "that during years of instability, we acted where law could not." Hale gestured toward the unearthed remains. "This is your stability." Samuel looked at the bones. For a moment, just a moment, something fractured in his composure. "They would have destroyed more lives than they cost," he said softly. The justification remained intact. Even now, Hale's voice did not rise. "Who appointed you guardian of consequence?" Samuel answered without hesitation. "History." It was the most revealing word he had spoken. He believed himself an instrument of preservation, a steward of social order in fragile times. He did not see himself as corrupt, saw himself as necessary. Faith and authority, the local Anglican minister, pale and shaken, stepped forward. "Did the church sanction this?" Samuel turned his head slightly. "The church entrusted us with maintaining moral discipline. That is not sanction for murder," the minister said. "No," Samuel agreed. "It is sanction for protection." The distinction revealed the core of the corruption. Faith had been used not as weapon but as shield, authority cloaked in piety. In colonial Virginia, church and state had never been fully separate. Vestrymen managed civic life. Magistrates enforced moral codes. Lines blurred easily. The circle exploited that blur. They met beneath sacred architecture. They recorded actions in discipline registers. They framed executions as purification. Faith did not create their actions, but it legitimized them, and that legitimacy proved more durable than fear. Arrest there was no dramatic struggle. When the magistrates present conferred quietly and announced that Samuel Thornton and the two surviving circle members would be detained pending formal charges, Samuel did not resist. He removed his signet ring calmly and handed it to Hale. "You believe this ends corruption?" Samuel asked. "No," Hale replied. "But it begins accountability." Samuel gave a faint, almost weary smile. Accountability is a luxury of stable societies. He allowed himself to be escorted away. The lantern light followed him up the embankment. And for the first time in decades, the Thornton name no longer commanded unquestioned authority. The trial that followed, was unlike any the colony had seen. Virginia in 1784 was navigating the delicate shift from colonial governance to Republican law. Courts were redefining jurisdiction. Anglican authority had weakened following disestablishment debates. The case forced the young state to confront a foundational question. Could those who claimed to preserve order be judged by the same laws they claimed to defend? Hale did not serve as prosecutor. He served as witness. He presented the ledgers, the letters, the signet ring. The testimony of families whose daughters had vanished. The defense argued necessity. They invoked war. They invoked disorder. They invoked the fragility of a colony abandoned by imperial protection. Some in the gallery nodded. Others wept. The trial lasted weeks. New names surfaced. More graves were located along riverbanks and forest edges. The circle's network proved smaller than the letters had. Implied several references were aspirational rather than confirmed, but the damage was real enough. In the end, Samuel Thornton and one magistrate were convicted of murder under the newly affirmed statutes of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The third, elderly and infirm, died before sentencing. The verdict was delivered without applause, only silence. Courtroom silence before a new chapter of history begins. Long-term consequences. The exposure had consequences far beyond the three men. Vestry authority was formally curtailed in local governance. Parish records were audited statewide. Formal tribunals were outlawed explicitly under new legislation. Public trust fractured, then slowly reformed. Historians decades later would debate whether the Thornton case accelerated the separation of church and state in Virginia. Some would argue it exposed the dangers of concentrated local power. Others would insist it was an anomaly exaggerated by political rivals. But one fact remained undeniable. After 1784, no documented disciplinary circles operated openly in Virginia parishes again. The Republic had survived exposure, scarred but intact. Jonathan Hale's reflection. Jonathan Hale did not seek public acclaim. He declined offers of office. He returned north once more, carrying copies of trial transcripts and personal journals. In his final recorded entry regarding the case, he wrote, "Corruption rarely announces itself as evil. It speaks in the language of necessity, cloaks itself in faith, it invokes stability, persuades men of good standing that they act for the greater good." He did not portray Samuel as monstrous. He portrayed him as convinced. Conviction, Hale warned, can be more dangerous than cruelty. The unresolved mystery, yet one question remained unanswered. Among the riverbank graves, one body was missing from the expected count. Anne Weller, the first victim. Her name had appeared in the original plantation ledger, but no confirmed remains were ever identified as hers. No clasp, no ribbon fragment with her initials, no documented burial site beyond speculation. Some whispered she had been the first correction and buried elsewhere. Others suggested she had escaped her stage death, serving as warning to others. No record confirmed either theory. Hale searched for years in scattered correspondence, hoping to reconcile the ledger entry with physical evidence. He never did. Anne Weller remained a name without bones, a question without answer. And perhaps that absence carried its own weight. Final reflection. History remembers revolutions for their declarations. It remembers generals and treaties. It remembers liberty proclaimed from courthouses. But beneath foundations, beneath brick and scripture, lie quieter stories. Stories of power exercised in shadow, of faith misused, of men who believed themselves guardians and became executioners. The Thornton case did not topple a nation. It did something more unsettling. It revealed that corruption can coexist with patriotism, that faith can be twisted without being abandoned, that accountability must be chosen, not assumed. The James River continues to flow past the remnants of old plantations. Brick crumbles, ledgers fade, but the questions endure. How many acts are justified in the name of order? How often does silence protect stability at the cost of truth? And when foundations crack, is it destruction or cleansing? Jonathan Hale believed that exposure did not purify the past. It illuminated it. And illumination, though painful, allows a society to decide who it wishes to become. The river gave back what was buried. The court rendered its verdict. The Republic moved forward. But somewhere beneath Virginia's soil, one name remains unaccounted for. Anne Weller, corrected or spared. We may never know. Perhaps that uncertainty is history's final lesson, because every nation is built on foundations it does not fully examine. And every foundation holds something buried? What do you believe was truly buried beneath those foundations?